All right. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. And I wrote good eventing. If you look in the chat, you'll notice that I wrote good eventing. So I've made the first mistake. So I give everyone permission now to do the same. Welcome everybody to the Software Delivery Leadership Forum. It's a safe space for us to talk about software delivery, make mistakes, talk about our mistakes, talk about things that we need help with. It's really just an open online and interactive discussion on topics related to Agile, DevOps, and continuous delivery. I'm Sam Fell.
And I'm Anders Wahlgren, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So our topic today is, and I'm gonna read here, so I'm gonna take my eyes off the camera somewhat weirdly because I can't memorize this stuff for some reason, but today's topic is Embrace, Don't Replace, Enterprise DevOps Realities. DevOps in the enterprise can include everything from mainframe to cloud native, monolith to microservices. And this reality means you can't simply rip and replace. You must embrace choice across teams, tools, and technologies to unlock innovation safely. So today, join us to discuss empowering teams through choice, standardization and flexibility and how they relate, and governance around tool experimentation and onboarding. And we've got an awesome panel, as always, and an awesome speaker to kick us off. So back to you, Sam.
Lovely. Sean, can we get the second slide? Boom, right there for everyone to see.
Could have read along with me.
Right, exactly, exactly. And so excited to talk through the topic with Sean. Sean, go to the next slide, please, and let's have you introduce yourself, please.
Yes, so thank you for having me. Excited to be here 4:30 in the morning from all the way from Los Angeles and talking about this embracing topic. I'm with CloudBees. I look over our SDA applications and solutions here at CloudBees. Today, I'm going to take off my CloudBees hat for the presentation, and I look forward to talking about this topic, in particular through the lens of a experience I had in the past leading a development organization. And so very excited to be here and look forward to the time we're going to spend together.
Lovely. Thank you, Sean. Next slide, please. So you'll also see that we have some folks who will be joining after the first half hour. Fantastic panelists of practitioners, thought leaders, experts in the field who are going to be chiming in with their own opinion. This Software Delivery Leadership Forum, though, is really not about us. It's about you, the folks in the audience. We put this together to make sure that there's a place for us to have a conversation about things that you care about. And we're trying to bring together people who have an opinion on these things and can maybe provide some guidance. So make sure that when we're going through this, keep it active and engaged. There's a chat feature in Zoom. We're trying to figure out the best way to get that engagement from our audience. And so use the chat feature. Know that your comments, if you want to make them anonymous, I believe there's a button to allow you to do that. You don't have to, but please keep yourself, be respectful, because any comments that are disrespectful, we're going to just blast that person out of the webinar. There's no need for that. I want to have everybody warm up, if you would. Yeah, exactly. Look at that. Deepak is already getting started. Put in the chat, just tell me where you're joining us from. We've got some folks from India, from San Jose, from Denver, from Scotland, right? So I'm glad that the weather's there. I've been to Scotland. I've done the whiskey trail. So many different shades of green. Just beautiful countryside. From Spain, New Hampshire, lovely. All right, so we're getting some great folks engaging on the chat. I want to keep that going. Next slide, please. And now we're going to just sit back. We're going to let Sean talk a little bit about this whole concept of embracing, replacing, not replacing, and the enterprise realities in DevOps. Keep the comments coming. Love to see everybody. Missoula, Montana, right on. I had an uncle that lived in Missoula, Montana. So, well, welcome. Sean, I'm going to hand it over to you. Take it away.
All right. Well, thanks. Good morning again, folks. As I said, I am going to speak about this topic. It's near and dear to my heart through the lens of an experience I had in the past running a software development organization for a company that essentially built applications, prototypes, and proof of concepts, and put them in production for a lot of regulated industries like commercial service, financial services, commercial banks, telcos, healthcare, and so on. It's going to be interesting to talk about the subject through that lens. As a leader of that organization, I think my drivers, my goals for the organization was probably not too unlike what many of the development leaders that are on this call and other companies have, which is that you have multiple teams. We kind of grew from a very small team of 10, 15 developers to 150 through that experience. And at multiple levels, we always had people working on different applications, different stacks, different tools, servicing multitude of different customers and users, and trying to get those teams to work in harmony throughout the entire SDLC was a critical component to success. Trying to get QA to work with developers, get ops to work together with the teams, everybody sort of moving in the same direction at the same time was critically important. One way to sort of help our teams be able to do that was to give them the tools that they wanted. Every sort of organization, every developer, every ops person had their suite setup of tools that were required to set up their process for the job that they have to be doing. That meant that we had a lot of proliferation of tools, but we found out through that experience that tool and embracing the various tools that are out there, from open source to commercial off-the-shelf software, was critically important to ensure that they could do the jobs that they wanted to do. At the same time, when we looked at folks like myself in the organizations and others and the customers we were servicing, we had to give them the information and support they needed so they could control and govern and see the overall process around how that process was going. So by no means a small set of challenges, and I'm sure they're equal to what many of you guys might have had and currently have within your organizations. If we switch the lens a little bit and take a look at it from the perspective of the businesses that we were servicing, they would obviously tell us that they had certain drivers that were critically important to them organizationally when it came to software. Number one, them being the organization we were servicing as a customer would tell us that every product, every service that they had traditionally delivered to their customers, that needed to be delivered digitally. And meaning, in other words, they had to go through this digital transformation. And that slowly they were starting to recognize that we're starting to become a software-led or software-first business, especially in financial services. And that meant that you had to drive innovation quickly. You had to spend money, you have to spend process, you have to spend effort and resources on ensuring that innovation came quickly to market, because that was the biggest competitive differentiators for a lot of these companies. But they were also quick to tell us the third bullet here, which is do deliver that innovation quickly to market, this idea that we might have had all the way to production, but do so safely. For goodness sake, this is people's money, this is people's communication, this is people's lives. Every industry would say we've got to deliver it safely, it's got to work, and it's got to be a great, delightful experience, which meant that we, as an organization, continuously needed to optimize our development process and delivery process as we moved forward. So with those drivers and those personal goals for me, I'd say the challenge facing us more so than anything else was that we wanted to get a handle as much as possible on all of our various processes. And that meant that we would create these maps that you have on the screen for all the various tools in the SDLC. And we would try to figure out how is software moving through these various tools, processes, and where's all the data associated and related to all the development efforts that we're making. And we'd work hard to get these views set up for one process, but this was easier to do when we were a small team of 10, 15 developers. We were working on one application, but when we realized that we were growing and we had multiple customers, we had multiple application, multiple delivery stacks and development stacks and so on and so forth, there was definitely a sort of hidden three-dimensionality, if you will, to the problem, as the slide tries to show you. Would realize that one team working on a multitude of applications would have different processes for each one of those applications. As you got further out to the right and needed to develop, release software, there was certain teams in the ops organization that had to release incredibly complex release, or had to have incredibly complex release processes in place, and a lot of governance around how the features are being and the capabilities are being delivered to customers. And we realized quickly that on the surface, every time we would try to get a map together that would show us our SDLC, so that when I came into the morning into the office and I would spend time trying to figure out where's all our work today, where are some of the challenges we have today. I'd be going through this map, and I'd be going through a multitude of number of tools and gathering and collecting information about the process, about the code and the features that's being developed, so that I could best guide the organization and best unlock some of the value that was stuck potentially in this process. And that did not become any easier as the number of teams, the number of application, number of tools, and number of delivery environments and more complex the release cycle got. The inverse physics problem happened fairly quickly. That is that as soon as we grew, the more difficult it became to get the visibility that we needed over our development and delivery process. The less control I had, and we lacked the discipline and governance required as a consequence, which all resulted in one thing, and that was that our pace of innovation got a lot slower than than we wanted it to be. So, good news, bad news kind of situation. Good news that we're not the only ones that were experiencing that problem as the pace of innovation grew, and as somebody in the chat said here, life always gets messier. I think as Sandra said, when you have multiple of anything, and that's true, right? And it was true for us as well. So we had a lot of help, experiences we could touch into and learn from. But the approach we took was to solve this problem was probably not the best one to begin with. And you can definitely chalk that up as the arrogance of Sean Ahmed, taking the first approach, and that was to say, hey, look, we've got way too many tools, and we've got a SDLC, and we have too many disconnections in here. And so what happens is, as we're developing things, certain information is sitting in one place, processes from just an innovation idea to delivery. These processes are sitting in multitude of different tools, which means we're splitting the rules and we're splitting the policies that are required across multitude of different places. So it's no way to get us easy access to understand where value is, which means that the teams that are working together that are supposed to get all this great innovation to market, they are very disconnected as well, which means that clearly the process communication will be very disconnected as well. So the answer to this conundrum, therefore, must be that remove the root cause of all disconnections, and that is reduce the number of tools. Take them away. We don't need all of this stuff. Replace it with an all-in-one system. And we took all our developers and all folks, and I really went very hard in on this one and said, let's go in and put them all in a box. We're going to give them one box to work in that has all these things already connected. And there's a lot of, DevOps platforms, if you will, or DevOps toolboxes, and where everything is from one vendor connected together, which says replace your source code repository, replace your CI/CD flow, replace your pipelines, and get it all into one box. And reluctantly, the organization followed, and we tried this. We started to see some ready benefits of that right off the bat, but very quickly something else happened, and it was not not a good thing, which is that as soon as we put that system in place, we realized it boxed us out, and it was a huge anti-patterns. Um, you know, all our developers sitting inside that box with the toolkit that we gave them were looking at the hammer and saying, well, what I really need is a screwdriver. And I can't be using this hammer here. And they were sort of inside the box looking out at all the wonderful tools that they wanted to use that would do the job that they needed to do much, much better. And coming back and saying, well, we want to use this tool and that will go fast, it might be better, but Sean Ahmed here, he won't let us use it. So we've got to use this inferior tool here for the job. This isn't very good. And I realized very quickly after doing that and seeing my developers being massively unhappy that that's definitely a bit of an anti-pattern. And we've got to resolve a bit of this this challenge that I'm seeing here. Taking away choice is definitely not the right way to go. So that's where I learned that freedom to developers and ops folks and these team members, especially as we were growing, as they were looking at the tools available to them for their process, the best possible tools for their software development needs. That freedom wasn't like it didn't mean, freedom didn't mean in the political sense, having social freedom, this and that. No, the freedom to them meant choice. And having the choice meant that they were able to get their focus and flow and suite setup associated with how they need and want to do the job the best possible way so that they can, drive that innovation as quickly as they can. And it was very clear that that suite setup, that choice, which I call developer freedom, was very much about getting that focus and flow that is often required and developers and I think anybody really wants. And it occurred to me at that point in time also that we all sort of yearn for that suite setup and the experience that best I can relay or share a parable story I can tell is the story of when you get your new laptop. I love getting a new laptop, but it's set up, it's a box, and you go through the first time you install the applications you want. You don't like Google Slide, but you want PowerPoint, or you don't want PowerPoint, you want Keynote. And it's because that's what you're used to and you're productive in that. Some people like Outlook, some people want just the Gmail client. Some people use the web Gmail client. And you spend some time, you spend hours getting that suite set up, and that's the same thing here. It's getting that focus and flow with that suite setup that makes you do your job the best possible way. To me, as a leader in the organization, that meant I'm gonna have to embrace that diversity of tools. I'm gonna have to embrace what the developers need in terms of their DevOps tool chain in order to build the software. But I was not ready yet to give up the idea of the governance, the control, the visibility that comes with an all-in-one system. So I wanted the best of both worlds. And that meant, a new challenge. That meant, first of all, rip out the silo I had created or the island of this box that I'd created that everybody had to live in. But I would have to give them a system, a way to do that, while at the same time being able to have the benefits of this one system. So we had quite the conundrum as we were growing. And at this point, we were about 110, 120 developers or so, which meant we had to think about how we build our I should say, backbone, if you will, or central nervous system of software delivery. So what we did is we kind of put down 5 pillars and we said, what do we really need in order to build that up? And the 5 pillars of that are on the slide, the 5 gears, if you will, that needed to exist for us is we needed to have continuous integration, continuous delivery. Our backbone had to be built on that. And most importantly, the release of the software itself. Things were getting very, very complex. We had multiple tools, we had multiple stacks, we knew that. And we knew that the places we were delivering our software. Sometimes it would be on the cloud, it would be a hybrid setup. The complexity of microservices applications were really, really tough. Some were more easy applications, straightforward. Some were far more complex and required a whole bunch more people involved in the testing process, QA process, and then, you know, onwards, we also had, you know, the desire, if you will, which is this fourth pillar here of having more end users involved in the testing process. And that sounded like craziness to us at the time, especially in financial services and places. But we realized that there are no better testers of features, and there is no better way of getting faster feedback loops than having actually production environment testing being done, which meant that canary deployments, A/B deployments, and so on and so forth. It was a little bit more than that. It was this idea that we could still deliver a very early feature that doesn't have all the bells and whistles yet, but having developers test it out, try it out in the early pieces of that code and give us feedback was really important. That meant that we need to be able to safely release a feature, but decouple it from the actual big deployment that contains all the bug fixes and the other things as well, and working finished features. Being able to turn features on and off, maybe release, put some specific rules around the feature so that only a very small subset of users could sort of look at it and provide some feedback in production and get us back so we could get the feedback loop going faster and drive that innovation faster. It was really, really important. And for me, the fifth cog here, or the fifth tile pillar, was being able to have my value stream visible to me, which meant I need to be able to see as a leader within the organization where value is. And what does that mean really? See where value is. Well, we had this concept that we create an idea generates a story generates a ticket in Jira. The ticket in Jira then has tons of associated research, meeting notes, calls, Word documents, product managers, maybe engineering and maybe marketing and so on and so forth, where they're coming together to talk about a particular feature. And in modern way, what I mean by that is a feature can come from anybody, come from an end user that, you know, had a feature request. And being able to sort of track that idea all the way through, sort of put a GoPro cam on your forehead and see, you know, follow the thread of the idea all the way through to which team was it assigned to, where did they start developing, where are they in developing, what workloads are they running, how are they testing it, how is that code being merged back together, what kind of code commits do we see, pull request, left, right, which releases it is, which environment are we releasing it to, what rules for the feature have we set, what experimentation, and then ultimately who's actually using it, and what's their feedback, do they like it, do they hate it? Being able to see all of that was very, very important to unlock the value. So, and that had to happen, these 5 pillars had to actually happen across a multitude of teams with multitude of processes and support multiple stacks and deliver it to any environment. And that's what we set out to build. And you know, for this little startup that I'm talking about and this experience, we got through 3 of these pillars, which was the CI/CD and release orchestration pillar. But as many people will tell me, getting all 5 of them were really, really important in a modern way. But we didn't get that far. We got acquired. And when we did get acquired, you know, it was an interesting little tidbit of story. We went to the CTO of the company that acquired our company, and did ask him, "Why did you acquire us? You know, what was your reason for acquiring us?" And it's kind of funny. He said, "Well, your applications are kind of meh, but they're good. I mean, they're not bad, but they're good. But it's really your development practices and how your team and organization is working, because once we got this suite set up for our organization, our teams worked better together. They had the same view. They loved the choice that they had of tooling and still being able to get that visibility and governance across the board. And that was their suite setup, our suite setup. And his answer was, "I'd love to sprinkle that into my existing organization." And that's when we kind of came up with our mantra, right? When we got our suite set up, we said, "Together we can." That's our mantra. You know, the whole organization, we can drive innovation quickly because we're speaking the same language. we're seeing the same things. We catch our challenges, our value being stuck earlier. We're far more optimized than we've ever been before, and we're delivering software more often, and we're doing it in a safe manner and delivering it to our constituency. And that's the story. That's kind of the story of why me having to embrace developers' choice and freedom was a critical aspect of our success. Could have gone the other way, but that's how we resolved it. And you know, kind of proud of that experience and happy that I get to tell that over here. So that's a little bit of the preamble, if you will, of the panel on what we mean when we say embrace, don't replace, and what it means for a development organization, for leaders. I'm going to pass it back on to Sam and Anders from here to drive some of the panel discussion with all these amazing leaders that are on the panel that live, breathe, and know this far better than I do. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to you guys.
Awesome. All right, next slide, please. And I will ask our esteemed colleagues to light up their Zoom cameras, please. Here we go. I'm seeing 1, 2, 3. This is the most fun part of the whole event, when I start to see faces or grayness. There it is. Perfect. Awesome. All right. So we do have a fantastic panel of practitioners and leaders to help us just explore this topic. And so I would like to have them introduce themselves. So Jorge, let's start with you. You are muted, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I work for BBVA, which is a global bank that is in 11 countries right now: US, Mexico, Spain, Turkey, some small part in the UK, Swiss, Peru, and some other parts in the world. So we are 13,000 developers around the world. And I'm responsible for providing the vision, the tools, the rules, and the good practices for developing and standardizing the way we develop software and to make it faster. So my KPIs are about speed and quality.
Very nice. All right. It's good to know what helps to pay the bills. It's good to focus on those things. So quality is a good one, and speed's a good one too. Wonderful. Welcome. James Loop is not able to join us this morning, so we're going to skip over him. We'll go to Mitch. Hi, Mitch.
Hi, good morning, Sam. Thanks for having me on the panel. I'm Mitch Ashley, CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group, an analyst firm that focuses on digital transformation, cloud, DevOps, and cybersecurity, and former CIO as well as product executive. So great to be here.
Great to have you. Mitch and the team at Accelerated Strategies are also helping us with this software delivery leadership forum at DevOps World, which we just put an announcement out, which will be virtual. There's a call for papers happening now. I'll have a slide on that later. But Mitch, great to have you join us. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sam.
Sam Knutson, welcome.
Good morning, Sam. Glad to be here. I lead product management for CompuWare. CompuWare is focused on enabling Agile and DevOps on the IBM Z mainframe platform. And looking forward to the discussion today.
Lovely, lovely. Yeah, we got to get the IBM proved already that elephants can dance. And so we got to keep them dancing, right? And last but not least, Tracy Miranda, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy. I lead the open source community team here at Cloudbees, and I'm also the chair of the governing board for the Continuous Delivery Foundation, which is an open source foundation that seeks to improve the world's capacity to deliver software. So, that's quite a mouthful, but it's a foundation backed by a number of enterprises, including Cloudbees, Google, Netflix, Salesforce, and Capital One. So happy to speak from that perspective and the open source side of things.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to ask Sean to go to the next slide. And before we start talking about the topic on the slide, I want to say that there is a Q&A tab. If you have questions that are apart from the questions that are being asked, we would love for you to ask them. we'd love for you to put them in the Q&A. We'll either get to them as a panel and discuss them, or we can respond to you directly in the Q&A app, if you will, of Zoom. But for chat, for right now, I'd like to pose this question, not only to our panelists, but to the audience as well. When you think about DevOps, kind of have an idea of what it is. I think the world in the last 10 years has come away with sort of a definition of what people think DevOps is. But what do you think the definition of enterprise DevOps is? What makes it so specifically different? And I'm going to ask the audience if you want to put some of your thoughts in the chat while we're having this conversation. And Jorge, I'm going to start with you. You've got 13,000 developers, you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me what your opinion is of enterprise DevOps, because it sounds like you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion is DevOps is about changing the way we build software, changing responsibilities, to make the software development faster and to get better quality. This is quite wide and not really deep explanation, but because that means many things depending on how the organization is running and what is the technology they are using. What I do right now is to provide vision, tools, roles, and good practices, but I'm not reorganizing things, which I think is a big part of this stake and something that will move the goats a lot into developing software faster. I mean, big organizations have normally spread the responsibilities along the software lifecycle in many different teams and in many different heads, and that creates big silos, and that makes the process really slow, and it's just incredible that a small piece of software takes around 100 days to reach production from the day you start designing the technological piece, not the moment in which you had the idea, or the business had the idea that we needed that. So I think,
I want to make sure I heard that. I'm sorry, Jorge. I'm sorry to interrupt. Two things, actually. First thing is I'm going to ask Sean maybe to stop presenting so that we see all of our cameras.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then Jorge, I want to make sure I understood what you just said. Could you repeat that again?
Yeah, what I mean is DevOps to me is about giving the full responsibility to development team to avoid silos. That's clear. The problem is, depending on how the organization is made or is designed, or the kind of company, because it's not the same a pharmaceutical company, a bank, or a company that is selling things like Amazon, selling stuff. There is no way to standardize that. There's no way to do the same thing in every single sector company.
Got it. Awesome. Okay. So hearing what your thoughts on enterprise DevOps is pretty interesting, because you're, like I said, you're sort of doing it. So I think that's pretty interesting. So Sam Knudsen, let's hear what your thoughts are. What's your definition of enterprise DevOps?
Well, I think, Anders touched on it in the chat. There's a great comment about comparing enterprise DevOps is to DevOps as cruise ship is to rowboat. And there is an element of scale. And Gary Groover has also written some great material about this. And he cites a couple of factors, one of which is your control of deployment and your dependencies. And, the enterprise DevOps tends to deal with a significantly larger set of dependencies and significantly less control on deployment. So you are threading the needle through a series of processes that you do not control 100%, and you have dependencies, you have systems of systems that start to have behaviors that go beyond some of the obvious.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of the iceberg is underwater.
I like that.
For the cruise ship analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that's sort of hidden from view. I'll give you that. V. Krishna Prasad just put a comment in, which I think is also good, is bringing in the DevOps practices as a common, consistent tools across the enterprise. The culture and communication, collaboration matures at enterprise level, not seen as a program level DevOps, right? So it's beyond just that silo, beyond that one team that's doing it. Everyone's like, wow, it's amazing how great they're able to go fast and do all this wonderful stuff, but they're just not interacting with anyone else. So I think there's something also there about the dependencies and threading that needle, Sam, that you talked about. The collaboration.
You didn't exactly ask this question, Sam, but to be successful with enterprise level DevOps, there's one factor that I've seen almost ubiquitous in really successful companies that are doing enterprise DevOps, and it's a combination of a technical champion and executive sponsorship. Because you enterprise level DevOps, because of that scale, the cruise ship factor, you can't drive that entirely from the bottom up. You can get attention, but you have to have an executive leader who really buys into this as necessary for the firm. And you also have to have a technical champion or champions who see how it can be accomplished.
Yep. Great points. I love it. I see
I
a lot
think-
of nodding.
I think
Anders.
the benefit you have often in a smaller company is that the same person can be the leader and the grassroots, kind of person, in a startup, for example. And as you get to these large organizations, those functions, get more kind of diffuse through the culture. And so, yeah, I mean, having the grassroots technical enablers and the leadership from above when it comes to, clearing the path and budgets and changes and all of those sorts of things are really, really important. So it's a good insight.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mitch, you've got Ross Clanton on your team, who I think has been that practitioner, leader, guru, dojo starting guy. So, Mitch, what are your thoughts on this topic?
He is, yeah, and that's a great example. If you don't know Ross Clanton, he's the sort of thought leader implementing the DevOps dojo, which is a great example of, it's hard to get any large organization centered around one thing and get the battleship, if you want to use that analogy, turned and moving one direction. So I think one of the things that's important to think about enterprise DevOps, because now you're talking about how you scale this across the organization, and there's not a training manual. Gary Groover, another one of our analysts, has great resources, great books, great seminars and sessions that you can do, but there isn't a prescriptive manual of how to do it. And I think the reason is because we deal with such a wide range of technologies in IT organizations, mainframes that you're talking about, Sam, things that are all cloud native, starting from scratch, and that whole spectrum. So I think you have to go back to ask the question of, why are you implementing DevOps? What do you want to get out of it? Because it isn't just follow these 5 steps and we're all doing the same thing. And then you can address questions like, how much are we going to standardize on tools? What things do we want to do in common? But probably more importantly, how do we learn from each other as we go through this process? And how is it helping us connect IT with the business, with the strategy, with the digital transformation, the acceleration of all of those things? So it's a great opportunity to connect us in a much deeper and, I would say, with much higher fidelity with the rest of the organization, so they can see the value of what we do and we can do a better job of delivering what we do.
I think that's a fantastic point. The whole idea of there's no one best practice. There are good practices and there are methods and practices. And even inside of a company, right? There will be one team that has their good practice and a different team that has a different good practice. Should you replace one of those teams' practices, or do you embrace those individual requirements that cause those two practices to emerge? And I think that's the compromise and the collaboration and the flexibility. I think that's, to me, that's sort of at the heart of what enterprise DevOps is.
Well, I think it's human nature to resist people forcing change. It's much more in our nature to love to take a good idea and make it better and adopt it. So sharing of those ideas will, I think, it'd be more infectious than the corporate antibodies that come from, here's our standard, thou shalt follow.
That's right. That's right. So Tracy, what are your thoughts on what's enterprise DevOps look like?
Yeah, so for me, like DevOps is always focuses on culture, and I think we've touched on this in terms of the teams. Just based on the scale, you're not talking about one specific culture. You're talking about lots of different types of culture, and people are hard. The boundaries are messy, so it's not necessarily easy to say, okay, this is the culture of that team, or enterprises will sometimes present themselves as, okay, this is how we do DevOps, but the reality can be quite different from group to group. And just the mentalities, you have, the analogy of settlers or town planners, and you have all of that in a mix inside an enterprise, and just trying to get everybody pulling in the right direction at scale is just a phenomenal challenge.
Yeah, it really is. And I
I
think
think it's that makes me think of one thing. I mean, one of the experiences I've had with large teams is, you get everybody in a room, and what you discover very quickly is that everybody has a different perception of how things get done. And some of it may be just a mistaken impression, or some of it may be, well, that's how we did it last year, but that's not how we do it this year. And those sorts of, whether you call it value stream mapping, or whether you call it team building, or sympathy and empathy, building, all those sorts of things, getting to the point where, there's a little bit of a shared common understanding, at least within, groups in a larger organization is pretty important, because that whole sympathy and empathy thing is a big part of culture. Is I need to understand why you're having trouble, accepting how I think I need to do things, and vice versa. And a lot of times when you start to talk about it, the reason we do it this way is X, Y, and Z, then sometimes that builds acceptance, because now I understand why you do it that way. But it can also mean that I can help you and say, look, we used to do Y that way, but we decided to do it a different way, and here's why, no pun intended. And so that sort of communication and sharing and kind of creating safe spaces where people can talk about that is really important in general, but especially in large organizations, because you can't possibly know how everybody gets their job done, and it's tricky to kind of build culture when you don't have that shared understanding. To the extent that you can build culture, that's probably a weird thing to say.
Right, and you should have just used Y prime, instead of Y and Y prime, and then everyone would understand, right? All right, awesome. Thank you for the comments, Sean. Any comments from you on enterprise DevOps? What's your definition of enterprise DevOps? What are you seeing?
Oh God, putting a definition on this, it's so hard. It's everything every panelist said here, and then some more. But look, if I was to add anything to it, I would say Tracy's comments around the culture and people, it was probably the one that hit the closest home for us. And it wasn't just about connecting developers to ops, the tools, the data, and so on and so forth, but it became so clear to us. The one day we had a CEO visit of one of these banks come into our office, and it was a bit of a interesting CEO. He was a little, cavalier, should I say. And he came into the office, and in the boardroom, we had the leadership group there. And he goes, all right, he bangs his hands on the table, and he goes, I'm spending $6 of every share on software delivery, this digital transformation thing you guys are doing. What's my return on investment? And I realized that the business was pretty disconnected from the software delivery, and to me, DevOps became connections across the entire organization, and making sure that the whole organization saw the value of software delivery as a core to the business, and that was a critical component. So to me, DevOps was not just the engineering organization or the ops organization, it was the whole organization, and building that cultural muscle that is required for everybody from the CEO all the way down to the individual contributors across the organizations to understand, operate, collaborate, and understand how software delivery, what we're building, is going to add value, and what's the best way to do it. And when we started sort of expanding our DevOps definition to include the business in this way, it was kind of a really interesting thing happened. Especially in banks, you have product owners or digital product owners. I'm sure Jorge might have some of those who sort of manage the delivery of that product digitally, this financial product digitally or something. Having them be part of the process early on to say, how should this software work? How should this service work? What features are the best ones to sort of drive this forward and so on, was critically important for them to understand the value of it, for them to be communicating it to the business, for the support organization and the people in the actual brick and mortar offices where the software is actually delivered, the service is delivered, for them to speak to the customers that are walking in and so on. So it's the whole organization. So probably plus 100 to Tracy's earlier comment there on it being a culture, being a people thing as well.
Right. Yeah, I like that. That sort of DevOps is just short for biz, dev, ops, sec, blah, 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 finance, legal, whatever. It's really the idea of aligning all of the different teams around creating value, digital value, software value. So I think that's lovely. Awesome. Okay, and I'm seeing some really good chats going on. Feel free, Mitch. I love the idea of having folks complete the survey. Why don't you chat that out to everybody? There's a survey that Accelerated Strategies is running right now about software delivery management. Would love to get your input on it. We're very looking for outside-in information is the way that we like to operate, instead of just sort of feeling like we're looking at our own belly button. So that's wonderful. So next slide, let's go to the next slide, the next topic for us to talk about. What impact does tooling choice have on your, and I gotta move all my stuff out of the way, on your software delivery lifecycle? I have too many windows in my way. So what impact does the tools that you use or the choices that you make, the choice that you're able to give to your developers, what does that do to your software? What impact does that have on your software delivery lifecycle?
And so, Sam, would you like for me to stop sharing again?
I would love for you to stop sharing again.
Perfect.
And so, that question is a high-level question. Inside of that question are things like, if you're giving your teams choice, does that make it harder for you to govern? Does that make it easier for you to attract top talent? Does that make it easier for your teams to get into that flow that Sean was sort of talking about? And so that's the nature of the question. If there are, I love that there were some of the audience that was participating and putting their answers in the chat. Would love to see other people sort of give us their thoughts on, what impact that does the choices that you're making inside of your organization have on the productivity of your organization or on the effectiveness of your software delivery lifecycle. So that's sort of what we're trying to get at. Let's see, I gotta find my Q&A thing and my chat thing again. Too many different windows to try and manage. All right, so Jorge, what are your thoughts on this? You've got 13,000 developers. What is the way that you're structuring your organization? Are you giving everybody their ability to choose whatever they want? Or are you having some standards? How does that work for you, and how's it working?
No, the problem for a company like BBVA and another big bank is I have the two phases. So I'm a next developer. I don't have time anymore to develop software, but I'm next developer. So I will be really happy of having the ability of choose the tools that I want to use. But on the other side, I have the European banking regulator coming to me with a 300, I just answered the last day, 382 questions about how I'm regulating the software delivery process, tools, and security stuff. So when you think that you're a bank and people have to trust you because they put their money in your bank and you save them, you have to provide some security about what the software that you are delivering is doing. So it's not that easy. And unfortunately, these big companies are companies that have been buying other companies or other banks that have their different cultures, different mindset, different talent, different way of doing things, and different bosses. So there is no way I can provide a set of rules or choices for them to do what they want to do. I can't tell them install Jenkins and provide and deliver software with Ansible, whatever, and connect that way, and that's it. And then you report me what you are doing because I have to report to the European Bank. There's no way to do that. There's not efficient in an economical way. There's no synergies, and it's very difficult that every single banking software engineering director, every single bank in the world that works for VA works exactly in the same way. So we provide a unique global set of tools for everybody in the bank, and people have started to, and we provide also what we call a framework to develop software. Not only one, there are 8 frameworks to develop front, back end, and different things with some security layers and everything else. So everybody develops software exactly in the same way, except some more innovative teams or specific and clearly defined teams that are able to do whatever they want, but are not inside the banking regulation. Okay, and that makes us to go really fast. And people is happy, is more and more happy because we are providing them a platform that is really close to the platforms that AWS or Google Cloud is providing to develop software. I think as soon as they find a platform as good as the one they can find outside of the company, they will be really happy. For us, hiring people is probably the highest problem, talented people.
Muted.
You're on mute.
Muted. Yep. So you're saying that that's really interesting. So you're saying that having that structure, you've got teams that are sort of doing reconnaissance on advanced technology, and you're incorporating that back into your 8 platforms that you're providing to the different teams. But that gives you that structure. And Guillermo, one of the attendees, asked us a really good question. How do you? And I'm going to go back. How can you sell the idea of global alignment and breaking silos without stealing freedoms from teams? And so what you're talking about here, Jorge, is putting a little bit of a box around what you consider to be the best practice for BBVA, but having teams that are constantly out looking at new technologies, figuring out how to incorporate that back into those platforms. I think that's
so that is also the way you behave with them. So I travel a lot. I ask and talk to many people about what they think about the platform we build, what they feel about the practices we're delivering. So we keep on constantly talking with our customers, which are the developers, to exactly know what they feel, if they like or not the platform and the way we are providing them to build software. Not everybody's happy always, but the most of them they are, and we keep on constantly working to make it faster, making them to feel free in certain way, because we want them to be free, to be creative, and to use some things that they like, but in the core things and the basic things and the basic rules, we are not able to let them do what they want. There's no way a team can just install an application to check security stuff and the source code, the static source code, because I don't know what exactly they are checking. So I have to have 1 or 2 or 3 tools to compare them between them, prices and performance and some other stuff, and just get 1 or 2 and to provide them for everybody.
And having those platforms, does it make it easier for developers to move between projects because things are sort of standardized? But yeah. The thing is, so that there's no, we have to be able to make flexible to get flexibility into moving people from one project to another, even between countries. And we are building the more and more global software. So most of 70% of the services, the APIs we create and we provide are global, are not local anymore. So every single country in which the bank is placed can use this API, get data, and build applications on top. So if I have one technology in each country, there is no way I'm going to standardize anything. Nice. All right.
And when you talk about metrics, that helps a lot.
Yeah, and we can talk about metrics. There are a lot of people commenting. I'm loving just the chat is just blowing up, which is fantastic. Mitch, I think you had something that you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I really want to build on both what Sam and Jorge have talked about, and that is there are great reasons to standardize and great reason to have a common tool set, but there's also a way to present this to the development teams in a way of what are you trying to solve? What problems are you solving for them to make their lives easier? How can you create this more of a frictionless process? So a great example is what are one of the big things you want to be able to do is spin up projects very quickly. You can go over to shelf A and pick off the tool set that we've already pre-integrated and built, and you can get started because teams are already familiar with it. You're familiar with where you go and talk to the groups that are supporting those to make whatever adjustments you need. Or you can go build it on your own and you'll be behind every other project. You're going to need to also, to Jorge's example, and especially in certain industries like finance and healthcare, you're going to have very stringent requirements of auditing and controls that you have to meet. Well, if your tool set will already generate most of the data you need for those kind of reports or information that you need to provide for a security audit or for the security team is looking for, if that tool set is already kind of preset to help you create most of those assets instead of the laborious task of going through and performing those audits manually, if you could solve that problem for a developer, I think as long as you give me the areas where I can innovate in how I create software and the software give me those areas where I have freedom to do lots of things and others where, I can get some benefits by doing things a common way, you're going to get developers to adopt that in a much greater level. Now, 13,000 developers is a lot. I can't speak to having any experience doing it at Jorge's size of organization, but I have to imagine if you can sort of think of it like a customer. What's the experience you want your customers in each part of the organization to have? And if you can solve problems for them, they're going to love you instead of hate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you say to an artist, you can use whatever medium, whatever things you want, you're going to get maybe something that's a little more creative than someone says, here's one blue color and here's one blue piece of paper and one blue paintbrush. Go make something exciting. It makes it a little bit trickier. All right, Sam, I heard your name mentioned. What are your thoughts on this? How does the tool choice and the way you structure your teams around that, different tools you're using, how does that impact the software delivery lifecycle?
Yeah, and it's funny because we've been having a great discussion in the chat about this, and it really comes down to understanding why you're going about this. And we've had some good threading around, sort of why, what, and how. And generally, if you have developers who are obsessed with working on a tool, using a piece of technology as a means to an end, they're looking at entirely the wrong thing because it's all about them. And what you need an organization that is focused on serving customers who are always going to be, as Amazon says, wonderfully, beautifully dissatisfied. So you got to understand what are the unmet needs you're trying to solve for, and just be obsessed about your customers. Then look to continually improve in the way that you're delivering to them. That sometimes may not mean that you're working on the language that was just invented last year or on a platform that you used for the last couple of years, but rather, instead of spending time rewriting software, you've got this working code, you want to leverage that to give more value to customers, faster. So it's got to be all about the customer.
Agreed on that. I don't know anyone would disagree that it needs to be all about the customer. And in this case, the customer is your developer, right? Or your DevOps team that's trying to move that code through the system. Fantastic. All right, Tracy, I see you looking to say something. What are your thoughts on this?
So I want to pull in the angle of like open source software, and I think a trend we're seeing a lot certainly is that a lot of enterprises are turning to open source software to try to figure out how to have that standardized platform and to not just for the software itself, the ecosystem that comes with it. Like at the CDF, we've had, you know, Capital One, JP Morgan, HSBC, all kind of banks who want to get involved in a way that, you know, you wouldn't have seen 10 years ago. And I think, you know, picking up on a point Jorge said, it's becoming increasingly about, you know, hiring, how every company is becoming a software company. Everybody's going to be hiring developers. How do you make sure, you know, you not only keep them happy with the tools they get to use, but appeal to this other sense. And, you know, open source has traditionally been a way to do that because folks love being connected to the ecosystem and they love the flexibility and the lack of friction with adopting solutions in that way.
Right. Nice. Awesome. And we're going to talk a little bit more about open source in another slide or two. So it's a big part of this conversation. That's great. Anders, you've been chiming in quite a bit, chatting, but not verbally. So tell me, what are some of the things that you're synthesizing out of your conversation on chat?
Well, so there's a couple of things that I mentioned in the chat that I'll, you know, just kind of reiterate. But self-service is one thing that you know, we've worked a lot on in the last few years, and it's, you know, it's a mechanism by which you can, you know, basically provide access to new tools in a more kind of governed way, you know, and make it also easier to adopt those tools. Now, of course, that means you need to be in an organization that's large enough that you have resources that you can dedicate to building these kinds of shared services and self-service approaches. But it's a very powerful way when, you know, if you have the new cool shiny new thing, and I don't mean that, you know, just pejoratively to call it a shiny new thing, but, you know, every day there's a new thing that comes along and you're like, oh, that could make my life easier. But you could easily spend your whole life just every day trying to try out the new tool. So what a lot of organizations have done successfully that I've worked with is you provide access to these things in a sort of through a self-service portal. And the idea being that you provide access to those new things in a way that when people use them, they get set up, configured, you know, as the organization wants in terms of security and access and all of those kinds of things. And, you know, yeah, there's an inevitable delay there in terms of how you roll something out, because you have to sort of configure and set up that sort of self-service access. But once you do that, then you can sort of let that tool loose and be fairly confident within the organization that it's going to get used properly and not get configured wrong or insecurely or something like that. So that's a way that we've seen large organizations be able to, you know, kind of allow people to use new tools much more quickly than they normally would be. I mean, you know, I've worked with organizations where, you know, they needed to choose a new virtualization platform or a new configuration management tool, and they spent 2 years making that choice. By the time they make their choice, the list of tools that they started with 2 years ago is now irrelevant, right? And you are at the risk of choosing a tool at the end of that very long evaluation period that's completely, you know, irrelevant for today. Things move so quickly. So that's been a way that people are kind of managing that a little bit, and with success. And then also just the kind of the cultural, psychological aspects of tools, especially when you start talking about changing tools and stop using this tool, start using this tool. You know, we all, I think, in a very human way, identify quite a bit with the tools that we sit in front of and use all day. You know, when I'm writing code, and for the last 15, probably almost 20 years, I've used IntelliJ. If you told me today that I can't use IntelliJ anymore and I have to use brand new tool X, you know, I'm going to cut you. You know, I'm not going to be happy, and I'm going to be in fear, right? Because if you don't value my tool anymore, the one that I've used all day, every day, then maybe you don't value me anymore. So that's a component of it as well. And you know, that shouldn't necessarily be the only or even the major guiding principle for how you make tool choices, but it's something to take into account. And that also touches on a lot of the other things around DevOps, which is, don't forget about things like training and education and upskilling and those sorts of things in the context of when you're picking tools and evolving your tool chain, because that's really, really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it doesn't just have to be development tools, because when I joined CloudBees, we started using Google Mail, and I'd been an Outlook person forever. And so there's, I think it's just you're starting something new and you don't want your first time to be spent learning the tools that you need to do to be creative and to do a good job. You want to just start doing a good job. And so to the extent that you can, as Jorge was talking about, keep the tooling similar enough so that the developers don't have that context switching and have to learn a whole new thing, they can come right in and they can start being productive without having to learn. Like for me, figuring out how to use Google and everything, it was not a big deal because I'd used it personally, but still there was some intimidation there on my part because I didn't want to be inefficient. I didn't want to be non-productive. I didn't want to spend my time trying to learn how to be productive.
And you know, and there's an inevitable kind of efficiency, if you will, gap as you adopt those new sorts of tools. As my camera goes offline again. But
great tools that you have.
Yeah. Zoom is such an awesome tool. I love it.
So Sean, what are your thoughts on that? How does the choice impact the SDLC?
So I, not to be contrarian, but I think
I love it.
I think to Jorge being at the opposite side of the scale spectrum that I was at, you know, I completely understand where Jorge is coming from when, you know, that approach comes on a smaller scale, much smaller scale of 150 developers where I was. We really took the developer freedom, the developer choice we took it to heart, because we took the pendulum and we took it all the way over to one side and we said the pendulum is you got a box and you live in that box, and we learned very quickly how much they hated it. So when we swung back to the other side, we didn't want to go completely wild west, but we came up with what we thought was the happy medium, and that was that to us, freedom of choice was, look, let's just make sure that we have a common rule set by which you choose your choices. And if it fits the criterion, then pick it, use it. And if it makes you go faster, better, and do your job better, absolutely. Because there's somebody who made a point early about the speed, and I think it's Anders, the speed of innovation in the tool sets that are coming to do specific jobs is just mind-boggling, right? As a leader, every day there's something else popping up that's supposed to make my life better. It's supposed to make my application stack 50 times better or whatever it is. And everybody wants to take those 9 new shiny objects and try them and test them and so on and so forth. If you're an organization with millions and millions of users, you can't just do that. I get it. But at 150 developers, providing an environment for people to be able to test it, use it, try it out, and figure out if it's the right thing, and so on, meant that all we did was we came up with a rule set and we said, look, our software delivery backbone is built using Jenkins. We specifically picked Jenkins because of its open source nature, its rich plugin ecosystem. We picked Electric Cloud that was Flow for all of our release orchestration because of its plugin infrastructure. And our rule was very simple. Rule number 1, any tool you pick must have a plugin and it must be able to be governed and managed by our release tool Flow and managed by Jenkins on the CI side. And that's our rule. That way we can at least have visibility into where in the value chain it's being used, how it's being used by whom, and if something gets stuck or how it's contributing to either value getting stuck or value moving forward through the very decision gates. That was critically important. And we could see this because we used to take all the data that came through our build processes and our release processes, and we used to put it in a separate database, and we had dashboards on it. So we knew every gate the software is going through. So our sort of box, if you will, the benefit box, as I talked about it earlier, was twofold, right? Number 1, freedom and choice for developers to pick, but a rule set, which is assigned. And that rule set means it needs to be pluggable with our box on top. And if it's pluggable with that, good. You can try it out, test it out, and if it makes sense, we use it in part of our flow. So that's how we did it, to stay true to that sort of developer tool choice. Why did we do it? And what did we see? we just saw developer happiness go through the roof, right? And that was super important to me. We just saw developer happiness and speed of innovation and just generally, hey, this is a great place to be, kind of situation go up quite a bit, which was important to us at 150 people in the development organization scale. Could be very different than Jorge's point of view when you're 13,000. So I said I was going to give you a little bit of a contrarian view, but in scope of that, I keep on pointing out the scale differential to say that it's not just contrarian, it's also a big scale difference. So there might not be a complete right or wrong answer here.
It's the rowboat and the this princess or whatever the huge ships are, right? The cruise ships. So different, definitely different scale. Jorge, would you want to comment back on anything that Sean said, or should we move on to the next topic?
Just really fast, I think what you have to be sure in a big organization is that you are really fixing the biggest pains at the beginning, because many times they don't really are willing for having a specific tool. They use example. We fixed the problem of not having enough data on testing environments for 3,000 developers in Spain. They don't care about if you copy the data with the shell script or you remove the database or whatever you want to do, but do it because I need to test my software, because there is no way I can even develop and test if that works or not until I get to production. So I think having a clear path of what do you have to fix, which order is determined. It's much more important than exactly the tool that you're using. At a certain level, obviously, the tool, it's like the pyramid of Maslow. At a certain level, yeah, you will want to go for this tool or the other because I think I feel more comfortable with these buttons or the colors or whatever. But yeah, you have to be clear where you are in the pyramid of fixing problems.
And the whole idea of abstraction of tools, Sean talked on this a little bit with the plugins and everything. Having Chef with one team and Puppet with another team, that's maybe not very efficient, but if that's what the team's like, that's fine. If you can abstract away configuration management as a bucket and just say, we're going to allow you to do configuration management and it's all taken care of. And then you've got hooks to make sure that happens correctly in the different environments. Who cares, right? If you're using both, as long as the developer workflow is going to be the same across the two tools. Yeah.
APIs standardization between tools in the market, it will be the key point for scaling and having a clear ecosystems. Otherwise, it's going to be complicated to be on the top.
Nice.
For a company that
Deming comments. Oops, sorry, Jorge. Sorry. So we got some Deming references in the chat. Didn't take long for that to happen. I love it. I like seeing that. All right, wonderful. So let's move on. Sean, can I ask you to put the next slide up on open source? And the question now that we'd like everyone to be thinking about is what impact, so how does open source fit into your application or into your tooling? And how does that impact your software delivery lifecycle? And what kinds of things are you sort of focused on around that topic? How does it fit into your DevOps stack and your application stack? How do you govern it? And how do you ensure that the teams are using this open source technology in a way that's congruent with your best practices or your good practices? Awesome. So let's go back to the panelist view. We have 15 minutes left. We've got a couple of other topics to cover. One of them being, the next one being, we can talk about it now. The next one being, what's your approach to managing multiple generations of technology? So we're talking about open source and generational technology. So things like databases, things like mainframes. Sam, you might want to comment on that. So great. So let's start with, I'm going to start with you, Mitch, because I haven't started with you yet. So I'm going to just call you out. So what are your thoughts on open source? How does that fit in?
Open source, I think, is a reality, hopefully, for most organizations. If it isn't, I'm guessing it is for your competitors. And the way I look at open source is, it's changed drastically from the days of a person leading a project and assembling a few co-conspirators of developing a piece of software, and it kind of organically grows. I mean, those things still happen, but they quickly take off, the things that are really valuable. But they do more so, not just from individual folks, but also from other companies. Google with Kubernetes is a great example, Terraform, et cetera. So if you step back for a moment, think of open source as a huge base of innovation. And why not take advantage of it? Just be smart about how you take advantage of it. I mean, I've learned the lessons of over modifying and getting yourself trapped into open source code that you're maintaining yourself, right? We've all kind of, hopefully we've learned some of those lessons ourselves, but think about what you can do to leverage all of that innovation and focus on the integration points, right? How does Kubernetes or how does this tool fit into our entire tool set? And yeah, maybe some things we build around it, slightly tweak here and there, but we want to spend our time delivering this capability and take advantage of it. I mean, that's my thought of it, because if you aren't taking advantage of it, I can promise you your competitors are.
Yeah, exactly. It's very hard to keep up with the amount of innovation coming out of everyone. It's just hard to do, for sure. Tracy, I'm assuming you have some thoughts on open source in the enterprise and in DevOps. So what are your thoughts there?
Yes, yeah, no, I think open source is key, but we certainly see that there's a number of challenges with it. And I think this is some of the thinking of why folks came together to form a foundation, because there's things that need to be tackled there for the industry and to make things better. So, one of those is interoperability. We can't keep going with this current fragmentation of tools, and we need, tools to merge towards more common APIs, standardized metadata. So there's, initiatives around that happening in the CDF. The other side is, how do we give confidence about things like security and, allay some of those fears. So, and this can be done by, compliance programs or providing certification for open source projects and, better tooling around software bill of materials. So again, something that's being pushed forward a lot in foundations like CDF. So I think this will help that adoption. So it's definitely, as Mitch says, if you're not already considering it, it's something you need to be looking at as an enterprise.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of notes in the chat, basically just saying, yeah, open source is sort of the future and need to make sure that we're doing that. Anders has an interesting comment. I'm going to let you go next.
I was just kind of riffing a little bit on Mitch talking about, patching open source components. And, one of the great things about open source is if you find a problem with it, whether it's a bug or something you'd like to work better or differently, you can just change it. But then you have the problem of, well, how do I get that back in, right? And in the old days of, we've got a subversion server over here and, oh, we don't even have a, this or that. I was just kind of making the comment that, Git has made the process and the mechanics of feeding changes back into open source projects so much, more frictionless than it used to be in the past. We still operate on the principle, we use a ton of open source, obviously. I think we all do. I don't think there's probably a single software component that any of us are using this morning that isn't using open source, and that if you remove that open source, stuff would just fall apart completely. So it's, we stand on the shoulders of open source in a major way, all of us. But, that process of when it isn't working right, how do I feed those changes back in, and how do I make sure I don't diverge and start to create massive technical debt? And we've been down that road a few times with some of the larger open source components out there, because we've had to patch them for performance reasons or security reasons, and it can take a long time sometimes. And some open source organizations have great culture about taking feedback and taking changes, and as with all organizations, some of them suck at doing that. So you kind of have to find the ones that are really good at it and open at taking changes back, and try to minimize how you diverge from them, because otherwise you're creating technical debt. And that's just going to accumulate over the years and make it, more difficult for you to keep up with changes and adopt new versions and take patches and take security, updates and those sorts of things. So it's sort of it's a virtual cycle of Git, an open source tool, has made open source tools easier to consume and easier to operate with and easier to push changes back into, pun intended. So that's a great thing. I think. I don't think we would be here without Git, honestly. I think it's one of the tools that has transformed the way that I work in the last 10 years, more than just about any other tool in the last 10 years. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but not a lot.
And it's interesting because it's really more about the way it changed the pattern of collaboration.
Yep.
Sure, there's technology there, but it's applying that technology in a way that allows people to find that flow that Sean was talking about, as opposed to bashing your head against and doing those big merges and things. It's just a much different practice, and it's a much more efficient one, apparently.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so Sean, I mentioned you. I'm going to ask you to chime in. Open source. You know a thing or two about that. What are your thoughts on open source in this milieu? You're muted, sir.
What should I say other than embrace, embrace, embrace? What would you expect from me, right? It was so important culturally for us. Just the strong values of community, transparency, and collaboration that comes with the open source community was at the core tenets of my experience, and I've always since then embraced it for those reasons. I think developers absolutely think of it as a place where they can innovate, do so securely, do so in a very transparent manner, and collaborate with people within and outside of the sort of organizational commercial setup that they're in, which leads to a rapid pace of innovation unlike anything else that you can see. And that, was something that we wanted to tap into. The flip side of that for a small organization like mine, and in that experience, is of course that it can bring in all kinds of things at a pace that the organization can't consume at times. Hey, I just tested out this thing, or I tried out that thing, or did you see that amazing new thing that is being released, and we should put this into production. And it put, for our ops people and our IT teams, a whole different kind of challenge. So there is that, and I won't ignore it. But embracing it was really just a part of the core tenet of the value system that I wanted to build within the organization. And I think any company that is not doing that, in my opinion, is losing out on a lot of good sweetness and goodness that comes with the community and open source software. So to me, embracing it is what I say.
So great comment from Akis. The best engineers I've met were also OSS contributors for the pride of the product, right? They have this passion for these projects. And Anders had said something in our previous edition of the same thing. We're basically saying that quality of commercial versus open source could be similar, but what tests are happening with open source. So you can actually look and see how it's being tested, what tests are being run. You can look at the source code to understand what's going on inside.
Or not being tested, because just because you're open source doesn't mean you're high quality, quite frankly, any more than being proprietary means you're high or low quality. It's just you can inspect it, and I like that. So absolutely.
Jorge, what are your thoughts on open source? You guys using open source tooling inside of BBVA?
We do a lot. I think now the question is not if the big companies have to embrace open source, is that how they are going to give back the value that they are getting from the open source.
Love it.
I think this is part of I will say the social responsibility of the big companies right now. They should be.
Wonderful. And do you have anything to share about what BBVA is doing in that regard?
Yeah, we are building, in fact, we are building a policy about how we are going to give back value to the open source communities in certain ways, in many ways. maybe building software with our own resources, maybe fixing things, maybe giving some money to some organizations. There are several ideas about how we are going to manage that. Yeah, and we do use a lot of open source.
And is that an initiative that you're driving, Jorge, or is that a different?
Not entirely. It was part of my idea, but it's not me the one that is driving. I'm collaborating with it.
That's a wonderful idea, and I think I don't know. Maybe you and Tracy can have a conversation.
Yeah, I was just thinking that you need to get involved with the Continuous Delivery Foundation.
Absolutely, this is great. I feel like I'm making a match here. Make me a match. All right. I won't force you to listen. Sam Knutson, open source, or
we use open source as a tools vendor. You know, we use open source libraries. We provide a number of Jenkins plugins because that's the common language that, you know, the most common experience that people are leveraging for CI in their software, you know, delivery tool chains, and we help them go faster. It's a vehicle to, you know, for things to be standardized, to reduce your development effort, and you have to manage it. But something that just keeps bubbling up. There's been a great chat going on here about open source, and it's almost the polar opposite of that is what we're trying to accelerate with all these open source efforts. It's delivering the unique business logic, the proprietary closed code that is actually unique to each firm. So BBVA they provide an amazing customer experience, and that digital DNA is not shared with, you know, other banks. So the things that are unique to them, you can't go and get in an open source project. The things that are unique to each large transportation company or bank or retailer, they're all trying to differentiate themselves. And that code, that working code, is gold. And so you want to wrap around that, you know, like Anders talked about, you know, automated tests. Everything we're talking about that is an enabler for open source and is applicable to building tools is also applicable to the code that our customers are not going to share. And that's ultimately generally what is going to provide the high value. That's where the firm is doing things that are unique.
Yeah.
Absolutely to mainframes. You know, you can use Jenkins with your mainframe, your distributed, your cloud native apps, and have an aligned CI tool chain. And in fact, that's what I focus on in my day job, is mainstreaming that access so that it is no different other than syntax from any other platform.
It's just one of the 8 platforms, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. Yep. Wonderful. All right. So we have 2 minutes left. We have one whole more topic, which is about how do you work with your legacy stuff. So I don't know if we want to try and cover that. I don't think we have time. I would like to go to Sean's screen though. And if you go to your next slide, and actually let's go to the next slide still, and let's talk about this. So really appreciate everybody joining the program. Hopefully this was educational. I know I learned a few things, but we were really interested in making this better for the end user. Same thing we've been talking about this whole time. We focused on what's the end user experience from a developer perspective and from a DevOps practitioner's perspective. How do we make this a fun experience and a good experience for them to be able to share and be creative? Well, we want you to share and be creative as well. We're going to be sending you an email with a post-event survey that Selena has put together. So we would love it if you give us some feedback. And we're also, DevOps World, many of you have been there before. It's the largest DevOps conference in the universe. And we've had many, many years of very successful shows. This year, we're doing it a little bit differently. We're going to be doing it as a virtual conference for obvious reasons. But we are actually working very closely with Mitch and the team at Accelerated Strategies on a software delivery leadership forum set of leadership track topics for us to also deliver this year at DevOps World. So I would urge you, it's actually the CFP now has been extended to June 4th. So I would urge you to submit if you have anything that you feel like sharing. We would love to have your learning shared with the broader community. At that, we are at time. I would love to thank our panelists for joining us, especially those who had to join super early. I appreciate that a lot. Sean, thank you for speaking. And to the audience, we really appreciate you being here and for contributing to the conversation and to the learning. We're going to be doing this again next month. Look for an email or come to the SDLF website and check out what's on the agenda. Next month, we have a conversation about modernizing your software delivery and figuring out what that business impact is. So we look forward to seeing you and having that conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.